Some daughters get an inheritance. I got a laminated calendar with my name on it. My mother handed it to me across the dinner table like a gift. Purple clip art suns dancing along the border. My name printed in the boxes for Tuesdays, Thursdays, alternating weekends. 14 places set around that table, 2 announcements coming, and only one of them was mine to give. But I need to take you back first because you should understand exactly what they thought I was before you watch what I did about it. My name is Grace Morgan. I'm 34. I keep newborn babies alive for a living, the tiniest ones, the ones born too early to have names ready yet. That Sunday in February, 3 weeks before everything changed, my family sat around my mother's dining table and decided the rest of my life belonged to them. My mother smiled when she said it. Everyone kept passing the rolls like my future was just another side dish somebody had already served. None of them knew about the folder on my phone. Let me show you a Sunday from 3 months earlier, because it tells you everything about the shape of my life back then. I drove out to my parents' house in the Cleveland suburbs with a casserole dish riding shotgun, because my mother had called Thursday and said, "You'll bring the potatoes, you're so good at them." I peeled at the sink while my sister-in-law Rebecca rested on the couch. I set the table. I fixed the porch light because my father mentioned it twice without looking at me, which in my family means it's already my job. I watched my brother Daniel's 4 kids while he and Rebecca scrolled their phones, and my mother gave the whole room a tour of Daniel's new promotion at the warehouse. Daniel got a toast. Rebecca got sympathy for how tired she looked. I got asked if I'd looked at the leaky faucet yet. I wasn't sulking. I laughed at the jokes. I love those kids so much it embarrasses me. But somewhere between the dishes and the diaper I ended up changing, I understood my role the way you understand weather. I was the appliance of that house. Reliable. Plugged in. Never consulted. When we cleared the plates, my mother packed leftovers for Daniel's family, for the neighbor, for anyone who'd left the room. There was no plate for me. Nobody noticed I'd never sat down to eat. I noticed that they didn't notice. I always noticed. If you want to understand how I got that role, you have to meet my grandmother, Margaret. When I was 27, her heart started failing. The family held a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. Daniel had 2 babies and a mortgage. My mother's back was bad. My father agreed with whatever my mother said. Then every face turned to me with the same warm, terrible confidence, and my mother said the sentence that ran my life for the next 4 years. "You're the nurse." So I became the nurse. 4 years of evenings on Maple Court. Pill organizers, 2 ambulance rides at 3 in the morning, 1 Christmas Eve in an ER hallway holding her hand while my family texted asking if I could still make the ham. I worked full shifts in the NICU, then drove over to do a second unpaid one. Margaret died 3 years ago with her hand in mine. At the funeral, the pastor praised my mother's devotion to family. My mother dabbed her eyes and accepted it. I stood in the second row and learned something about how credit travels in my family. Flows uphill. She left me something though. Not money. I'll get to it. It's the reason there was ever a folder on my phone at all. After Margaret died, the family found me a new job without posting it. Daniel and Rebecca lived 10 minutes away with 4 kids and a schedule held together by string. I became the string. Fever at midnight, call Aunt Grace. Rebecca's stuck somewhere, Grace can grab the kids. And here's the complicated part, the part that kept the whole machine running. I genuinely loved them. Especially the youngest, a 7-year-old named Nora, who was the only person in that family who ever asked me questions about me. What's your favorite bird? Do nurses get scared? I would have walked into traffic for that kid and everybody knew it. That was exactly the problem. Love is a wonderful rope to tie someone with, because they'll hold the knot for you themselves. Let me show you the 2 halves of my life back to back. One Tuesday in October, 4 in the morning, I stood over an incubator with a baby girl born at 26 weeks, smaller than a bag of flour. Her oxygen dipped. For 90 seconds my hands and my training were the only wall between that child and the dark. We got her back. Her mother gripped my wrist afterward and said, "You're an angel. Does your family know what you do?" 12 hours later I was at my parents' house helping move the good china, and when I said I was exhausted and wanted to go home, my mother waved a dish towel at me, cheerful as a ham, and said, "Oh, stay and do the pots, honey. It's not like you have anything to rush home to." Strangers in a hospital hallway thought I was a miracle. The woman who raised me thought I was a free hour with legs. That's the thing about being useful. Nobody asks the lamp about its day. 3 weeks after that, the group chat exploded, and everything I'm about to tell you began. An ultrasound photo lit up my phone in the break room. Baby number 5. My brother typed round 5 baby with a dozen exclamation points. I felt gladness first, honestly. I love babies. I've spent 11 years learning how to keep the smallest of them breathing. I typed my congratulations and meant every word. Then my phone buzzed again. Not the group chat. A private call from my mother, which was strange because my mother communicates through whoever she's standing next to, not directly. Her voice had a shine on it I hadn't heard in years. "We need to talk about the plan, sweetheart." "What plan, Mom?" She laughed, light as frosting. "We'll talk Sunday." Then she hung up, and I stood there with a feeling in my stomach I couldn't name yet. My body knew before I did. Sunday came. My mother laid it out at her kitchen counter while frosting a sheet cake, casual as a weather report. Rebecca would be underwater with a newborn and 4 kids by summer. Daycare for that many cost more than Daniel made in a month, which was true. Then she got to the point. "So we've been thinking you could go part-time at the hospital, or step away for a while. Honestly, that's cleaner. Family takes care of family." "No, Mom," I said plainly, calmly, the way you'd state your name in court. "I have a job. I love my job. I'm not quitting to be a nanny." She didn't argue. Arguing would have meant she'd heard me. She just tapped her spatula twice against the bowl and said, "Well, we'll figure out the details later." My father wandered in, took a swipe of frosting, and said, "Your mother's got it all worked out," with real admiration, the way other men say my wife restores furniture. I drove home replaying it. I'd said no, clearly in English, and it had passed through her like wine through a screen door. What scared me wasn't that she'd ignored it. It was how relaxed she'd been. My mother is never relaxed unless she's already certain she's won. I found out where the certainty came from soon enough. Here's what nobody in my family knew. 10 months earlier, after losing a 24-weeker at 5 in the morning and crying in a supply closet, I'd come home to a voicemail from my mother asking me to make 3 dozen deviled eggs for a church thing, since you're off Thursday. Something in me went very still that night. I sat down, still in my coat, and finished an application I'd had bookmarked for a year and never let myself complete. A neonatal resuscitation training program in Galway, Ireland. 2 years teaching nurses and midwives the thing I do best in the world. Only one person knew, my best friend and charge nurse, Priya, who kept the secret like a vault. By November I was a finalist. A decision was coming in December. So while my mother frosted her certainty onto a sheet cake, I had a maybe growing across an ocean. Just a maybe. But some nights, a maybe is the only thing standing between a woman and a basement. The first proof of the plan found me mid-shift, a call from Daniel's kids' school. I was listed as an emergency contact nobody had told me about. The second found me in a grocery aisle. An aunt hugging me, glowing, telling me the whole church already knew I was taking the year off for the new baby. My mother had gone out ahead of me into every room I might ever stand in, and told my story first. I decided to tell them the truth before they could finish deciding it for me. I rehearsed it for 3 days. Friday dinner, I finally got the first sentence out. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something about next year," when the phone rang. One of the kids had spiked a fever, a brief seizure on the kitchen floor. Nothing serious, but everything after that was coats and headlights and me being exactly who they needed me to be, again. At midnight, standing in Daniel's kitchen with a sleeping child heavy on my shoulder, my mother looked around at the wreckage and said to the room, "You see, this is exactly why the plan makes sense." The following week, my landlord called, cheerful, asking about moving timelines, because my father had mentioned at bowling that I'd be moving home in spring. I hadn't been asked. I drove to my parents and found my father in the garage, oiling something that didn't need it, and asked if he'd really discussed ending my lease before anyone asked me a single question. "Your mother said it was decided," he said. "Not we decided. Not even she decided. It was decided. Weather. Gravity. An act of God." I understood, watching him, that he was never going to be the one to hand me my own future back. 2 weeks later, standing in the hospital's supply room between shelves of preemie diapers, my phone buzzed with an email. The subject line began with the exact words I'd been praying toward for 10 months. Offer of appointment. I didn't open it in the car. Some things you don't unwrap under a parking garage light. I walked back inside into the one place I have always known exactly who I am, and I read it. A 2-year contract. A real salary. A start date of March 9th. I made a folder on my phone that night. When it asked me to name it, I didn't type Ireland. I typed 4 letters. June. Because it had her name on it in a way I hadn't told you about yet. And I still hadn't signed a thing. My hands were shaking too hard. That's when I remembered the watch. The last clear night my grandmother had, about a month before the end, she pressed an old wristwatch into my palm. A small, slow one, for minutes behind always had been. She told me a story I'd never heard in 31 years. That she'd once been accepted into an art program in Chicago at 19, and never went, because somebody always needed her more. "I kept waiting for somebody to tell me it was my turn," she said. "Nobody ever did, Grace. Nobody hands a woman her turn. You take it." I was wearing that watch in the supply room the night the offer came. So I opened the folder called June. And with my hands still shaking, I signed the contract, and I bought a one-way ticket to Shannon. I meant to tell my parents that week, calmly, alone. Instead, my mother met me at the door, grabbed my sleeve and led me down to the basement. Freshly painted pale yellow, my childhood bed made up with a quilt I recognized. New curtains hung over the window wells. "It'll be like having our little girl home," she said, and her voice wobbled with real feeling. That's the part one need you to sit with. It was real. She wasn't performing. They had built the cage lovingly. I stood there with the offer letter folded in my purse, and I understood exactly what would happen if I announced Ireland right there, alone, with 3 weeks of phone calls and tears available to be deployed against me before I ever reached an airport. My mother wanted an audience for my future. Fine. She'd get one. By the following Sunday, I had already ended my lease, booked the movers, and handed in my resignation at the hospital. 30 days notice, every box checked. Because I was not going to leave my baby short-staffed on my way out the door. There was no version of the future left where I stayed. The only thing my family could still take from me was the goodbye. So when I walked into that dining room, past 14 place settings and a spiral-bound packet propped against my water glass with my name on the tab, I wasn't there to ask permission. I was there to deliver the news. And in my pocket, my phone sat warm against my hip, patient as a stone, holding the one thing that was about to change everything. My mother stood up, dinged her glass with a spoon, and the whole table went quiet the way it always does for her. "God also provides the help," she said, glowing, turning to present me to my own family like a prize behind a curtain. "From June, our Grace will be stepping away from the hospital and moving home, to be this family's full-time nanny. All 5 babies. One loving aunt." She actually got applause. And that's when I reached into my pocket. The applause was still settling when I set my glass down. "Mom," I said, level and pleasant. "We've talked about this. I have a career. I have a life." The clapping trailed off. My mother tilted her head at me with genuine bottomless fondness. Oh, sweetheart. You don't have a real life anyway. No husband, no babies, that little apartment. This is us giving you one. Nobody flinched. My aunt studied her ambrosia salad. My father topped off the nearest glass of cider like a man bailing a boat, 1 teaspoon at a time. My whole family sat in perfect, comfortable agreement that my life was a vacant lot they'd finally found a use for. I smiled. Because 3 weeks. That's why I could smile. I unlocked my phone under the table, opened the folder named June, and stood the way my mother had stood. I set the phone face up in the middle of the table, between the ambrosia and the chicken carcass, slow and gentle, like laying down a winning hand you're not even proud of. Before you laminate anything else, I said, you should see this. The contract filled the screen. Hospital crest. Neonatal resuscitation training specialist. Galway. My signature already dated 3 weeks back. I swiped once, the boarding confirmation. One way, Ohio to Shannon, March 1st. 21 days from that table. Nobody moved. 14 place settings and not one sound, except my youngest niece drumming her spoon against her tray, the only honest noise in the house. Rebecca's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel leaned in, read the screen and went gray. My father looked at my mother, which is what my father does instead of having reactions of his own. So I said the rest and I kept my voice the way I keep it during a code. Low. Slow. Procedural. I've taken a 2-year post in Ireland, training nurses to save babies like ours. I've signed. I've given up my apartment. Friday was my last shift. I fly in 3 weeks. I looked around the frozen table, then down at the spiral packet still leaning against my plate. The plan you printed has one problem. I was never yours to schedule. For 1 second, maybe 2, nothing happened. Then I watched my mother's face do something I had never seen it do in 34 years. It went from marble to water. Her chin shook. Her eyes filled right there over the good china. You would leave this family, she said, barely above the sound of the furnace, over a job. That was the soft thing. And it landed like soft things do, deep under the ribs. Then the room thawed all at once. Rebecca burst into real tears. How could you do this to the baby? A baby, I should mention, who did not exist yet and already outranked me. Daniel said nothing, just worked the edge of the tablecloth between 2 fingers, staring at my signature like it was a car crash. My father took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt and said to no one, Ireland. That's an ocean away. My mother cycled through her arsenal, one weapon at a time, while I stood there and watched it happen almost in slow motion. First the little laugh, this is a phase, you'll come home by summer. Then the prosecutor sneaking around behind your family's back, who does that? Then the pulpit, hand flat on the table, charity begins at home. I gave her the only thing I had left. Brevity. It's signed, I said. It's paid. It's done. 3 flat stones, one at a time, into all that churning water. That's when my uncle, who hadn't said a full sentence all evening, muted the football, turned in his chair and said, Carol, let the girl talk. So I used the floor for 15 years worth. Not shouting. Not crying. Just plain like a discharge summary. Since you think I don't have a real life, let me tell you where it went. 4 years of it went to Grandma Margaret. Every evening, every weekend, every ambulance ride, while this family checked on her progress once a week like a package. The last 3 went to Daniel's kids. The midnight fevers, the pickups, the seizure on the kitchen floor. I did it out of love, and I'd do most of it again. But every one of you filed it under free. I picked up the spiral packet with my name on the tab and set it back down gently in front of Rebecca, like returning something borrowed. You listed me as an emergency contact without asking. You printed me a schedule before a single one of you said please. Dad talked to my landlord. Mom told the whole church. My future got planned in this house at this table. So here's my one question, and I'd like a real answer. In 15 years, did even one of you one time ask me what I wanted? Nothing. The furnace hummed. My niece looked from face to face, doing math no 7-year-old should have to do. That's what I thought, I said, gentler than I expected, because the silence was sadder than I expected. Family takes care of family. I agree, Mom. I've been doing it for 15 years. I was just never included in the family being taken care of. My mother folded her napkin slowly, pressing each crease. When she looked up, the storm was gone, and something patient had replaced it. That scared me more than the shouting. Grace, she said, soft as bathwater. Sit down, baby. Please. I stayed standing, but something in me leaned toward that voice, because I had been waiting my whole life to hear it. You're right, she said, and the table gasped in its own quiet way. We should have asked. That's my fault, and I'm saying it in front of everyone. She spread her hands, humble, reasonable. So let's fix it the right way. 1 year. Just until the baby's steady and Rebecca's back on her feet. Then you go to Ireland with our blessing. We'll throw you a proper send-off at church. Your father will drive you to the airport himself. Don't leave us like this in anger with everything broken. Don't you want to leave the right way? My father said quietly, We'll finally do it right, kiddo. I want to be honest about that moment because it's the real story, not the phone. Everything I had ever wanted from these people was sitting on that table, wrapped and ribboned, to be asked, to be thanked, to be blessed on my way out the door. All I had to do was hand them 1 more year, and I could buy the exact love I'd spent 15 years working toward on credit. I felt myself begin to nod. Then I caught it. The flaw in the diamond. A blessing you have to buy isn't a blessing. It's an invoice with a bow on it. And there would always be 1 more year. The baby would need to be steady. Then the next one would need kindergarten. Then Mom's knees would go. The machine never runs out of reasons. It runs on them. No, I said. The word came out quiet and complete. Not in a year, Mom. Not the right way. Because there was never going to be a right way for me to leave, only a paid way. I picked my phone back up off the table. And you were wrong about one thing tonight. I do have a real life. You've just never once asked to see it. Then I went around the table because the clock had run out on the rest of it. I hugged the kids one by one. I crouched at my niece's chair and told her, level with her eyes, a letter every month. Nurse promise. She nodded, businesslike, chin trembling, and stamped the back of my hand with her thumb, because the real stamp was back at the library. I got my coat. Behind me, my mother's chair barked against the floor as she stood too fast, and her voice finally broke open around the last card in the deck, the oldest one there is. If you get on that plane, she said, shaking, don't you call this house your home anymore. The room drew one collective breath. I stopped at the doorway, turned around and looked at her, furious, terrified, wet-eyed, dressed in her good earrings. The machine's best worker, and its oldest casualty, standing in the same body. Then I'll write to the people in it who still call me family, I said. And I walked out into the February cold. Nobody followed me. I sat in my car at the curb for a while before I could drive. The dining room window glowed gold behind the curtains, shapes still moving inside it. My whole family still gathered around the chicken I'd made them one last time. I cried once hard about 90 seconds, hands at 10 and 2 like I was steering through it. Grief, not regret. There's a difference, and that night I finally learned it in my own body. You can be certain and heartbroken at the same time. Both all the way. I looked down at my grandmother's watch, and did something I'd been meaning to do for 3 years. Nothing. I left it 4 minutes slow, exactly as she'd kept it, because I finally understood the setting. It was never measuring time. It was measuring the cost of waiting for permission. On March 1st I flew. Nobody from the house came, and I'd made my peace with that at the curb 3 weeks earlier. My best friend drove me to the airport, cried at security, and texted me a photo of my own plane lifting off. Galway tested me first. It rained sideways for 11 days. I knew nobody, and my flat came with a kettle and a silence I had to learn like a new language. Then my first training day arrived. A room full of nurses standing up when I walked in. My name already on the schedule board. Let specialist. Paid. Printed. Asked for. News from home arrived in pieces, mostly through Daniel, who started texting a couple weeks in.